In the heart of a brutal winter night in 1887, as a Wyoming blizzard howled like a starving beast, a lone woman sat in a desolate train station, about to succumb to the killing cold. Her only worldly possessions were $3, a faded photograph, and a heart heavy with shattered dreams. She had no idea that, in mere moments, a stranger would emerge from the snowstorm, not only to save her life, but to write the first chapter of one of the grandest and most admired love stories in the history of the untamed American West. The winter wind of 1887 did not merely howl. It roared across the untamed lands of the Wyoming Territory, its cry a mournful dirge that carried death and broke hearts. Amidst the desolation of the Cheyenne train station, a woman sat motionless. On a wooden bench, her body nearly frozen by the biting cold. Each breath she took materialized into a cloud of white vapor in the frigid air. She clutched a small, worn leather bag that held her entire earthly fortune, a mere $3, a faded photograph, and a heart heavy with dreams that had grown. As cold as the blizzard itself, but what was about to unfold in this very place would weave a love story told and retold from the Colorado River to the Canadian border. A tale that would forever alter the destinies of two people and carve an indelible mark into the history of the untamed American West. Through the shrieking of the tempest, a new sound intruded, steady and powerful, the rhythmic beat of hooves on the frozen ground. Libby lifted her weary eyes, peering through the thick, dancing curtain of snow. A tall figure approached, mounted on a magnificent black stallion whose dark coat stood out against the stark white landscape. Even in the storm, the man's bearing radiated an undeniable confidence and authority. He dismounted, expertly tying the reins to a post before striding toward the station. Libby couldn't help but notice the expensive leather boots and the steady gait of a man accustomed to being the master of his own fate. When the door swung open, a blast of icy wind and swirling snow rushed in. Yet the man himself seemed to carry his own aura of warmth. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice deep and warm with a hint of a Texas drawl. Like a small fire kindled in the dead of night, he touched the brim of his wide hat in a polite gesture. "It's a bitter cold night to be sitting out here alone." Libby tried to reply, but her teeth chattered so hard she could not form a single coherent word. She could only manage a weak nod. The man drew closer, his eyes filled with sincere concern as he looked at her pale face and purple lips. He was perhaps 30 years of age, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. His face was weathered by sun and wind, yet his eyes held a rare kindness. "Name's Jackson Thornton, but most folks call me Jack," he introduced himself, pulling off his leather gloves. "I own the Double T Ranch about 20 miles north of here." He glanced at her medical bag and her attire, which though worn, still retained an air of elegance. "I was in town on business, heading home when I saw you through the window. Are you a doctor, miss?" "A nurse," Libby managed to stammer, each word an icy struggle. "Elizabeth Montgomery, from Philadelphia." Jack's eyes lit up. A trained nurse was rarer than gold in the Wyoming Territory. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice filled with urgency, "you'll freeze to death if you stay here. The storm is getting worse, and the station has no heat. Please, let me take you somewhere warm." Hope and hesitation warred within Libby. Bitter experience had taught her not to trust men easily, but she was desperate, and there was something about this Jack Thornton that set him apart. Without hesitation, Jack removed his own heavy coat and draped it over her trembling shoulders. The warmth from his body still clung to the fabric, a luxurious heat that made her gasp with relief. It smelled of leather, horses, and something clean, like pine. When Libby tried to stand, her legs were too stiff from the cold to obey. Without a word, Jack bent down and swept her up into his powerful arms, her precious medical bag included. She was as light as a feather, he thought, and trembling like a leaf in a storm. "The hotel is just across the street," he said, his voice resolute as he carried her through the roaring snow. "We'll get you a room, some hot food, and then you can tell me what brings a nurse from Philadelphia to Wyoming in the middle of this harsh winter." As they stepped outside, Libby found herself pressed against Jack's solid chest. For the first time in months, she felt safe. She did not know this man, nor his intentions, but somehow she trusted him. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was the kindness she had not seen in far too long. In his arms, in the middle of the cold winter's night, a glimmer of hope began to glow, promising a new dawn after the long dark night. The dawn that followed the storm brought with it a pristine silence and a world reborn under a blanket of pure white snow. The Wyoming sky was an impossible blue, and the air was cold but crisp, promising a new beginning. Jack had refused all of Libby's thanks, instead taking her to purchase a warm coat, a pair of fitted boots, and other necessities. When she shyly protested the expense, he simply smiled and called it an advance on your salary, a smile that was becoming familiar. And warming her heart, they rode north. The 3-hour journey was not tedious. On the contrary, it was a symphony for the senses that left Libby, a woman accustomed to the narrow streets of Philadelphia, breathless. On either side of them were vast, snow-covered prairies, sparkling under the sun like millions of diamonds. In the distance, a majestic mountain range rose against the blue sky, its snow-capped peaks like solemn, ancient kings. Libby felt a sense of freedom she had never known, an expansiveness that opened her soul. Jack, riding beside her, served as a proud guide, pointing out the creeks where they watered their herds, the groves of cottonwoods that provided shade during summer roundups, and finally, the posts that marked the border of the Double T Ranch. "There she is," Jack said, his voice deep with unconcealed pride as they crested a hill. Libby nearly gasped. Below them, in a wide, sheltered valley, the Double T Ranch revealed itself not as a mere farm, but as a small town, a hub of life and constant motion. The main house was large and stately, built of sturdy logs and stone. Surrounding it were countless other structures, a bunkhouse for the cowboys, stables, corrals, a blacksmith shop with smoke curling from its chimney, and various other outbuildings. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and she could see men working diligently despite the cold. "It's beautiful," she said, the words coming from the bottom of her heart. "Wait until spring," Jack replied, his eyes twinkling. "When the grass is green and the wildflowers are in bloom, there's no prettier sight in all of Wyoming." As they rode into the main yard, men began to emerge from the buildings to greet their boss. Word of the woman accompanying Jack had clearly spread, and everyone was curious. "Boys," Jack called out as he dismounted, "I want you to meet Miss Elizabeth Montgomery. She is our new nurse." A cheer went up from the crowd, making Libby's cheeks flush. An old cowboy with a gray-streaked beard stepped forward. "Name's Tom. Bradley, miss. I'm the foreman here. Can't tell you how glad we are to have someone with medical training on the ranch." "Thank you, Mr. Bradley," Libby replied as Jack helped her down from her horse. "I hope I can be of help." Jack led her toward a small but solidly built cabin, about 50 yards from the main house. "This will be your home," he said, opening the door. Inside, the space was simple but wonderfully cozy. A fire was already crackling in the hearth, chasing away the outside chill. The wooden furniture was rustic but clean, and the cook's wife, Martha, had thoughtfully stocked the kitchen with supplies. But the greatest surprise was yet to come. "There's one more thing," Jack said, leading her to a door she hadn't noticed. He opened it, and Libby fell silent. It was a medical room more fully equipped than anything she could have dared to dream of. There was a professional examination table, glass cabinets filled with medicines, neatly arranged surgical instruments, and everything was clean and shining. It was better than some of the hospitals she had worked in back east. "Jack," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Tears began to well in her eyes, tears of gratitude and relief after a long chain of humiliation and hardship. This kindness was too immense. "A good nurse is worth a fortune," he said simply, but his eyes showed that he understood her feelings. "Besides, I ordered most of this months ago, hoping that one day I'd find someone to use it." As if to prove his point, a knock came at the door. Foreman Tom helped a young cowboy, hopping on one foot, into the cabin. "Sorry to bother you, miss, but Billy here just got his foot stepped on by his horse." Instantly, Libby pushed her personal emotions aside. She became someone else entirely. "Bring him into the medical room," she ordered, her voice becoming professional and decisive. "We need to get that boot off and see what we're dealing with." As she began her work, examining Billy's bruised foot, she could feel Jack's gaze watching her from the doorway. In that moment, in the warmth of her new home and in the role she was born to play, Libby knew she had truly come home. Spring came to Wyoming without warning, a whisper that tiptoed through the hills, awakening the land from its long winter slumber. Snow melted to reveal carpets of new green grass stretching to the horizon, dotted with the purple, yellow, and white of wildflowers. For Libby, the rebirth of nature was also the rebirth of her own soul. She had become completely immersed in the rhythm of life at the Double T. Her hands, once accustomed only to caring for people, were now adept at delivering calves and foals and treating every injury, large or small, for the cowboys. She had become an indispensable part of the ranch, a guardian angel loved and respected by all. But it was her deepening relationship with Jack that truly occupied her thoughts. By day, they maintained a professional distance, but when dusk fell, painting the distant mountain peaks in shades of purple, the porch of her cabin became a private world for just the two of them. They would sit there for hours over cups of hot coffee, sharing everything. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, and she spoke of her experiences in the East, of hopes and fears she had never dared to confess to anyone. The bond between them grew not with a roar, but with the quiet, inexorable force of an underground river flowing toward a great sea. One evening in late April, as the air grew cool and fragrant with wildflowers, Jack became unusually somber. "Libby, there's something about my past I need to tell you," he began, his voice uncharacteristically serious. Libby set her coffee cup down, giving him her full attention. "I was married before," he said quietly, his eyes on the distant horizon. "Her name was Rebecca. We grew up together in Texas. She passed away 3 years ago from a fever. When Rebecca died, I thought my chance at happiness had died with her." A pang of pain shot through Libby's heart. He continued, "But she wasn't like you, Libby. Rebecca was gentle and delicate. You are strong, independent, and willing to face any challenge head on. I love that about you." Libby's heart stopped. "Jack, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know our working relationship complicates things, but I can no longer pretend that my feelings for you are merely professional respect." "My feelings aren't either," Libby admitted, her voice trembling. Before they could say more, Foreman Tom Bradley came running up, his face pale with worry. "Boss, Miss Libby, there's been an accident." Lightning spooked the horses, and young Danny got trampled. "He's hurt bad." In an instant, Libby was on her feet. All personal feelings were cast aside, replaced by the instinct of a healer. She ran to the medical room to grab her supplies while Jack rushed to saddle a horse to ride for the doctor in Cheyenne. But when Libby reached the bunkhouse and saw Danny's injuries, she knew they had no time to wait. The 18-year-old cowboy was unconscious, his chest crushed and his breathing ragged. Internal bleeding was obvious. She had to operate immediately, or they would lose him. "Clear a table," she ordered the stunned men gathered around. "I need lots of light, hot water, and clean linens. "Tom, I need you to assist me." "Miss Libby," Tom hesitated. "Shouldn't we wait for the doc? He'll be dead before the doctor gets." "Here," Libby stated, her voice ironclad, leaving no room for doubt. "I have performed this surgery before. We can save him, but we have to act now." For the next 3 hours, the bunkhouse was transformed into a makeshift operating theater. Under the flickering lamplight, Libby worked with extraordinary focus. Her hands, so gentle when dressing a small cut, now moved with a precise and decisive grace, like a dancer performing a ballet of life and death. The cowboys, the toughest of men, stood in breathless silence, watching in awe of her courage and skill. When she finally stepped back, exhausted but her face radiant, Danny's breathing had become steady, and the color had returned to his face. "He'll live," she announced. The room erupted in cheers. Jack, who had returned with the old doctor an hour earlier, stood in the doorway, watching her with undisguised admiration. When the doctor examined Danny and exclaimed that Libby's work was as fine as any surgeon's. In Denver, the pride in Jack's eyes was visible to all. Later that night, after Danny had been moved to a room next to Libby's for closer observation, she and Jack finally had a moment alone on her porch. The moonlight bathed the landscape in a magical silver glow. "What you did tonight," Jack began, his voice thick with emotion. "It was incredible. You saved that boy's life." "It's what any trained nurse would have done," Libby replied, trying to be modest. "No," Jack said firmly, turning to look directly into her eyes. "It's what you did, and that is why I love you." The words hung in the still Wyoming night, clear and powerful. Libby looked at the man who had rescued her from freezing, given her a home, a purpose, and now looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you too," she replied, simply and truthfully. Jack leaned over and gave her a kiss, sweet and tender under the star-filled sky. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing heavily. "Marry me, Libby," Jack said, his voice earnest. "I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I cannot imagine my life without you now." Libby looked into his eyes, where she saw a universe of sincerity. In her heart, she already knew the answer. Word of Jack Thornton's proposal spread faster than a prairie fire, becoming the cheerful talk of neighboring ranches and the town of Cheyenne. Contrary to Libby's initial worries, the reaction from everyone was overwhelmingly warm. The cowboys, who had come to see her as a member of their own family, saw the match as a perfect act of fate. Even foreman Tom Bradley, once a bit skeptical, was now their staunchest supporter. "Never seen the boss smile so much," he told Libby one morning as she checked on Danny's recovery. "You're good for him, Missy. Good for all of us." The wedding was set for the first Saturday in June, and it quickly became the most anticipated social event of the season in that part of the Wyoming territory. People flocked to the Double T from all over, cowboys from neighboring ranches, townspeople from Cheyenne, and even Jack's wealthy business associates from as far as Denver made the journey to witness the union. On that day, the Wyoming sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, as if nature itself was bestowing its blessing. Libby wore a wedding dress of ivory silk that Jack had specially ordered from San Francisco. Martha had skillfully woven wildflowers from the prairie into her long hair, making her look as radiant as the purest bloom. As she walked down the aisle formed by 2 rows of solemn cowboys, with Tom Bradley proudly escorting her in place of the father she had lost, everyone held their breath at her beauty. Jack waited for her at the altar, which had been set up on the porch of the main house that would now be their home. He was dressed in his finest black suit, looking more nervous than Libby had ever seen him. The moment their eyes met, however, all his anxiety vanished, replaced by a smile of pure, unadulterated joy that seemed to light up the world. The circuit preacher, who traveled throughout the territory, performed the ceremony. His words about love, commitment, and partnership seemed especially poignant given how Jack and Libby had found each other. "Do you, Jackson Thomas Thornton, take Elizabeth Rose Montgomery to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jack answered, his voice clear and strong, filled with all the certainty in the world. "And do you, Elizabeth Rose Montgomery, take Jackson Thomas Thornton to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Libby replied, her voice firm and clear, without a hint of hesitation. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was so passionate and triumphant that it drew cheers and whistles from the cowboys. Libby blushed, but she leaned into his embrace, feeling utterly secure in the love they shared. The celebration that followed was legendary. Cookie the cook had outdone himself with a feast. There was music, dancing, and storytelling that lasted well into the night. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Danny, still recovering but determined to attend, stood to make a toast. "To Mrs. Thornton," he said, raising his glass of lemonade. "The woman who saved my life and made our boss the happiest man in Wyoming. May your love story inspire generations to come." The crowd erupted in agreement. Libby felt tears of joy sting her eyes as Jack squeezed her hand as the night wound down and the guests began to depart. Jack and Libby found themselves alone on the porch. "Well, Mrs. Thornton," Jack said, taking his wife's hands, "how does it feel to be a married woman?" "It feels like coming home," Libby answered honestly, "as if everything that happened before was just preparing me for this moment." "I have something for you," Jack said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He produced a small velvet box. Inside was a beautiful gold locket. "Jack, it's beautiful," Libby breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "Open it," he urged. Inside, on one side, was a miniature photograph of them taken that very day. On the other side was engraved the words, "Forever and always, J.T." "Now, you'll always have me close to your heart," Jack said softly. "I already do," Libby whispered, and kissed him. Under the star-filled Wyoming sky, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the ranch and the whisper of the wind, their love was sealed. Not just by a ceremony, but by a promise of eternity. The first years of their marriage passed like a gentle, beautiful song. Libby was not just the mistress of the Double T. She was its soul. Under her care, no man was lost to a treatable wound, and the reputation of the Angel of Wyoming spread far beyond the territory's borders, spoken of with reverence in tales told around campfires. Jack, with Libby by his side, seemed to possess a new strength. He ran his business with far-sighted vision, and his love for his wife deepened with each passing day, becoming the guiding light of his life. But happiness, no matter how complete, cannot always banish the ghosts of the past. In the spring of 1889, a dark cloud began to gather from the east. A telegram arrived, bearing a name Libby had tried to bury in her memory, Dr. Harrison. He had come to Cheyenne, not as a failure, but as an authorized investigator tasked with investigating the practice of medicine by unlicensed individuals. "He's come to make trouble," Libby said to Jack that night, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. The telegram lay on the table like a coiled serpent. "He will never forgive me." Jack wrapped his arms around his wife, his chest a solid wall of strength. "Let him come," he said, his voice hard, his eyes narrowing to a cold glint. "He will soon find that things are different out here." 3 days later, Harrison arrived at the ranch, accompanied by a territorial marshal. He was a thin, sallow man, with cunning eyes and a permanent sneer that made one's skin crawl. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness. "Or should I say Miss Montgomery? I am here to investigate reports of illegal medical practice." "My wife is a trained nurse," Jack said, stepping in front of Libby, his tall frame a protective shield. "She has the certificates to prove it." "Certificates?" That are worthless if she was dismissed for moral turpitude, Harrison retorted smoothly. Did you tell your husband about your behavior back in Philadelphia, my dear? I told him about a coward who tried to force himself on me and got his nose broken for his trouble, Libby answered, her voice surprisingly steady. Her heart may have been pounding, but she would not let him see her fear. Your word against mine, Harrison sneered. And I am a respected physician while you are ... He never finished the sentence. A steel fist belonging to Jack Thornton connected with his jaw, sending the smug man sprawling into the dust. The marshal instinctively reached for his gun butt, froze when he found himself facing 30 angry cowboys who had silently appeared from all directions, as if they had sprung from the earth itself. Now see here, the marshal said nervously. I am a citizen of the Wyoming territory, Jack said, his voice calm but his eyes blazing. You wish to question my wife's credentials? Fine, we will go to town and have a public hearing where justice will be served. The hearing was held in the Cheyenne courthouse 3 days later, and it seemed half the territory had shown up to support Libby. Patient after patient stood to testify, recounting how she had saved their lives, caring for them with skill and compassion. The old doctor from Cheyenne gave an eloquent speech about her surgical abilities. Even the territorial governor, who had met Libby at a party, sent a letter praising her contributions to Wyoming's medical care. Harrison's accusations crumbled under the weight of the truth. It was revealed that he himself had been dismissed from his hospital for alcoholism and incompetence. When Tom Bradley took the stand, his voice booming as he recounted the night Libby saved Danny's life, performing a surgery no one else in the territory could have, the judge's decision was sealed. Mrs. Thornton, the judge said, his voice filled with respect, your service to this territory has been exemplary. Your nursing certificate is hereby officially recognized by the territorial government. You are authorized to practice medicine throughout Wyoming. He turned to Harrison, his eyes filled with contempt. As for you, Dr. Harrison, I suggest you leave our territory immediately, before these good people decide to show you the same hospitality you have shown their beloved nurse. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Libby found herself swept up into Jack's arms as he spun her around in a victorious embrace. It's over, he whispered in her ear. He can't hurt you anymore. We did it together, Libby replied, looking deep into her husband's eyes. Together we can face anything. That night, as they celebrated with friends and neighbors, Libby realized their love story had become something larger. They had defeated not just a villain, but injustice itself. They had proven that here, in the Wild West, honor and courage were worth more than deceitful words, and love could be a fortress that no enemy could breach. Time moved on, and the love story of Jack and Libby Thornton became more than just a romance. It became the foundation for the growth of an entire region. By 1892, 5 years after their wedding, the Double T Ranch had expanded to over 100,000 acres, and the reputation of their cattle and horses was renowned throughout the West. But their legacy extended far beyond pastures and cattle. Libby, with her boundless compassion and vision, used the family's resources to establish the first true hospital in the territory, a modern facility in Cheyenne that saved countless lives. Not stopping there, she opened a nursing school, passing on her knowledge and her passion to young women, who would later bring medical care to the most remote corners of the land. Her name was published in medical journals back east, a recognition she never sought but fully deserved. Jack, too, became a political force, serving in the territorial legislature and championing the cause for Wyoming statehood. He invested in railroads and mines and built an entire town on the edge of the ranch, naming it Thornton, providing homes, schools, and a church for the families of his workers. But amid all these grand achievements, their greatest joy was intensely personal and private: the 3 children they were blessed with. Twin boys, Thomas and Jackson Jr., were born in 1890, carrying their father's love for the land and their mother's compassionate heart. Then, in 1892, their youngest, a daughter, was born. She was named Rebecca. With Libby's blessing and love, the name was no longer a ghost of the past, but a tribute and a symbol of complete healing. One evening, as they stood by the cradle watching their baby daughter sleep, Jack whispered, "She's going to be a healer. Like her mother. Look at those gentle hands." Libby smiled, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "Or a rancher like her father. Those hands look strong enough to handle the reins of a horse." "Perhaps both," Jack said, pulling his wife into his arms. "In this family, we believe in limitless possibilities." He looked deeply into Libby's eyes. "Do you ever regret it? Leaving Philadelphia, coming west, taking a chance on a rough cowboy?" "Never," Libby affirmed, her voice resolute. "The night you found me at that station was the luckiest night of my life. Everything that happened before was just preparing me to be your wife and the mother of your children." "I love you, Libby Thornton," Jack said, kissing her forehead. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Jackson Thornton," she replied, "forever and always." Their lives continued in fulfillment. Jack passed away in 1923 at the age of 86. Libby, unable to bear a life without her beloved husband, followed him just 3 months later. They were buried together on a hill overlooking the Double T Valley, where they had built an empire from. Nothing but 2 hands and an infinite love. On their shared headstone, chosen by their children, was inscribed a simple line, "Forever and always." A love that made history. Today, more than a century later, visitors still come to Wyoming to seek out the place where the legendary love story began. They visit the site of the old station, tour the Double T Ranch, now a museum, and walk through the thriving town of Thornton. In the museum in Cheyenne, one can still see Libby's small medical bag, the one she carried on that fateful winter night in 1887. Beside it are Jack's wedding ring and a copy of their marriage certificate. These relics are a testament to an unchanging truth, that love can blossom in the most unlikely of circumstances, and that the greatest adventures sometimes begin with a single act of kindness, when one stranger reaches out a hand to another in need. The legend of Jack and Libby Thornton lives on, an immortal testament to the power of love and the promise of the American West.